Being nervous on your driving test is completely understandable. It's normal, but it is possible to decrease your nerves and increase your confidence with a bit of advice and a deeper understanding of what the examiner is actually looking for. Firstly, the good news is the driving test is probably a lot easier than you're expecting. When you're learning to drive, most likely you have been taught to jump through loads of hoops to pass the driving test, which makes the driving test sound complicated. For example, you must do a handbrake start every time you move away, or you have to do a robotic 6-point check whenever you're moving away from the side of the road. Keep your hands at 10 and 2, pretty much all of the time unless you're changing gear. Never cross your arms. I crossed my arms, have I failed? And when you're reversing, if you see anything, you must stop and wait. Now I have a video on driving test myths, I'll leave a link to it up there. I used to believe this was true. I used to believe that's what the examiners wanted, but I've been teaching people for a while now. I started in 2009 and that's what I used to teach people when I first became a driving instructor. But over the years of taking people to test and talking to examiners, I've learned that they're not actually interested in this stuff. What they want is for you to drive safely and legally. When you moved away from the side of the road, were your observations good enough to make sure you could see no one was coming before you went? Usually checking behind, whatever mirrors helping you see behind, and your roadside blind spot, and of course ahead as well. Now there's going to be some people saying that they failed the test for crossing their arms when they steered the wheel, but it's not the crossing the arms that would have caused the fail. It would be they've gone to turn and they've been unable to turn enough because they've crossed their arms, and then they've had to sort of rush and make it back as they've gone round the bend. So they weren't able to keep the car going where they wanted to go all the time. That was because of their steering technique, which happened to be they were crossing their arms probably too much like that. But if you steer well and keep the car where you want it to go, then the examiner should not fail you. If you drive safely and legally, you should pass. I'm not going into every myth in this video because that's not what this video is about and that will take too long, but I will give you another example. One myth is that if you're reversing, if you see anybody at all coming towards you, you must stop. But that's not true. In fact, many years ago, I had a pupil fail for doing just that, and it was entirely my fault because that's what I told them to do, because that's what I had been taught to tell my pupils to do. They were reversing round the corner to the left, a manoeuvre that's no longer part of the test, and they kept stopping for cars on the other side of the road. We weren't affecting them, and the examiner failed them for taking too long. But of course, if you don't stop for cars that you are affecting, then that would likely be a fail. If you see a car coming or any kind of vehicle and you are affecting them, stop, give way, see what they're going to do. If they come past, let them pass. If they're going to let you finish your manoeuvre, then carry on and finish your manoeuvre. Your driving instructor is not going to be able to show you every situation you're ever going to come across during your lessons. During your test, and certainly after your test, you're going to come across situations that you have not seen before. I'm sure today when I drive, every so often I'll see something that I haven't seen before and I've got to figure out what to do. So, what can you do? Well, there used to be an examiner, he's retired now, and when he could see that the learner driver was struggling to decide what to do in a situation, he would say, what can you do? Now, the examiner isn't allowed to tell the pupil what to do, but they can give encouragement. If they can see you're getting flustered, they can pull you over at the side of the road, tell you to take a breather for a few seconds, tell you to try and stay calm, try and enjoy the drive, and then let you go again. And there's nothing wrong with saying, what can you do? Because the examiner isn't telling the pupil what to do, they're just giving encouragement. Encouragement to think for yourself. And that's the golden rule here. Whenever you come across a situation that you've not seen before, you're not sure how to deal with it, think for yourself. Think, what can I do that's safe and legal? And if what you do is safe and it is legal, then you should still pass. Take your driving instructor with you on test. Not only can they see you drive, so that if something goes wrong, they're more able to help you, but the driving test passed quota myth. Now I'm going to underline myth there because it is a myth. The Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency do not set how many pupils an examiner can pass. But what they do and this is the problem, is they monitor the pass rate of the examiners. Let's say there's a driving test centre which over all the examiners has an average pass rate of 45%. But there's one examiner there who's passing 60% of the pupils over the course of a year. The DVSA think, well, they're clearly not marking it to the same standard as the other examiners. They're probably marking it incorrectly, so they investigate that examiner. And what people believe is that to avoid being investigated, examiners try to self-regulate their pass rate. If their pass rate's going up, they'll be more harsh and fail more people. If their pass rate's going down below the average for the area, they'll try and be less harsh and pass more people. And I'm sure that does happen. We're talking about 1,500 people here. That's how many examiners there are, give or take. And some of them are probably going to do that to avoid being investigated. But if they just do their job properly, they're going to be somewhere in the middle anyway. However, if you take your driving instructor with you, well, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do any funny business because they're being watched. It's not always obvious what lane you need at a junction. Generally, it's left lane to go left and ahead and right lane to go right if there's two lanes. I have a video about roundabouts, which includes lane choice up there. Sometimes it can be different and there will be road markings and road signs to tell you that. Let's say you need to use the right lane to go ahead on this occasion. If there's road signs and road markings nice and early to tell you that, then you should follow those. Your examiner isn't going to give you help, but they will give you help if it's not obvious that you need a different lane to normal. Let's say they want you to go ahead, second exit a roundabout. Usually you would choose the left lane. On this occasion, at this roundabout, it's actually the right lane you need, but there's no road signs, and the only road markings that there are near the give way line at the roundabout, too late to be helpful. They will help you in these situations. They will say, at the roundabout, I would like you to go ahead, second exit. But on this occasion, you may find it easier to use the right lane. That's them understanding that there's no way of you knowing you need to use the right lane, so they're giving you advice. My advice is to take their advice when they give you those directions. Don't allow yourself to rush. I rush sometimes, and when I do, things go badly. It's not just about driving. I could be rushing cooking, chopping an onion and cut myself, rush around the house, stub my toe, bang my head. When you rush, bad things happen. And what helps me is when I catch myself rushing, realise I'm doing it and slow myself down and control myself. So my advice is, if you start to rush when you're driving, and when learner drivers are feeling flustered, quite often their response to feeling flustered is to rush, which leads to them feeling more flustered, which leads to them rushing more, and you get this positive feedback loop, which is not helpful. Well, if you catch yourself rushing, slow yourself down. That's my advice. Don't allow yourself to rush. Slow yourself down for a little bit. Go at a lower speed than you normally go, just for a bit, just to clear your head and think, I've got this. I can think clearly, I can figure out what to do, I'm in control, and then return to normal speed. Yes, you may get marked down for going a bit slow for a while. That's possible. But if you allow yourself to rush, the mistake you can make from rushing is probably going to be far worse. This is probably the single best thing you can do for confidence on your driving test. Make sure you're test ready before you go to test. If you go to test before you're ready, then you're not going to be confident. You know you're not ready. But if you are ready, that's going to help your confidence immeasurably. You're still going to feel nervous, of course, but not as nervous as if you're underprepared. How do you know when you're ready? Well, make sure you can pass a full-length mock test with your driving instructor without any help. And the last couple of lessons before your test, you should have been able to drive the majority of those lessons with very minimal help from your instructor. Try to come to terms with the possibility that you may fail and have to do the driving test again. If you go into your driving test feeling like you must pass, that is an immense amount of pressure, and that's going to make the test harder. If you go into it feeling like, well, I like to pass, but I can always do it again, that's going to make the test easier. Now I know there's a long waiting list. I'm filming this on the 22nd of August 2023, and yeah, the waiting list is still long, but I'm yet to have a pupil who has not been able to find a driving test at relatively short notice when they have tried to. What they've had to do is they've had to go online, check to see if there's any dates available. And they've had to do that several times a day for several days. And when they do that, actually usually within a few days, a test booking pops up and they grab it and book it. And usually it's within a couple of weeks. So knowing that can make you feel more comfortable that you're not going to have to wait like 6 months to do another test. If you do fail, search for cancellations. You should be able to find one. If you search regularly enough, you should be able to find one relatively soon. I've not had a pupil who's not been able to do that yet. Understanding that can take away some of the pressure. Don't make your manoeuvres harder than they need to be. During your driving test, when you're doing a manoeuvre, your examiner is more interested in good observations and good control than they are expert precision driver levels of accuracy. What I mean by this, good observations, good all-round 360-degree check, often enough that if someone approaches, you will notice before they get to you. And when it comes to good control, that means you should be able to keep the car going in the intended direction slowly, not rolling down the hill all the time and shooting backwards and stopping. They're actually very lenient when it comes to accuracy. Take the parallel parking exercise. They say, pull up alongside the car, reverse back, stop near the curb and within 2 car lengths of the car. 2 car lengths, that's a big space. Don't make it hard by trying to make it a quarter of a car length. Use some of that space to make it easier and don't try and get an inch from the curb. That's going to make it harder and more risky. Even if you stop within a drain's width of the curb, they are still likely going to pass you. If, however, you think you are too far from the curb, don't be afraid to adjust. Pull forwards, come back and try and get a bit closer. Many people say you only get 1 adjustment on your driving test, but that's not true. Okay, often it is the case. Let's say you reverse into a car park parking space and it goes horribly wrong. Nowhere near. You go out, come back again, and you haven't made it better. Well, the examiner is probably going to call it a day there and go, that'll do. However, let's say you haven't failed yet and you reverse back and it doesn't go very well. You're not in the space. You pull forwards, you come back, and this time you make it a lot better, but it's not quite the ticket. Well, they're probably going to wait there and give you more time. They may even say, are you finished? If you're not finished, don't say you are. Go forwards and come back and try again. If the examiner's had enough, they'll say, that will do. They'll stop you and finish the manoeuvre. Don't be afraid to check either. So if you're in the space and you're not sure, you think you might not be in the space, you might be over the line, secure the car. Handbrake up, neutral. Park if you're in an automatic. Open the door and check. Or if you're parallel parking, you're not sure if you're too close to the curb, or, well, you can't be too close to the curb, can you? You'll be on the curb if you're too close, you would know about that. You're not sure that you're too far from the curb is what I meant to say. If you can, lower your electric mirror to have a look. You can do that, see if you're close enough or not, and then return it. But whatever you do, don't give up on your manoeuvre until you have finished. I'm just editing this video and I think I've made it sound like the examiners are giving a hint when they say, are you finished? But it's not a hint. They're not suggesting that you need to change your position. They're just asking, can we get on with the rest of the test? Have you finished? And if it's the end of the test, sometimes you do your manoeuvre at the end of the test and they can finish the test. And if your examiner asks you to stop during your manoeuvre, that doesn't mean you've done it badly. It just means they've seen enough. You've done enough. You could easily have passed. If you're doing your parallel park exercise, it's quite common for people to get parallel to the curb within 2 car lengths, but then keep reversing back in a straight line longer than they need to. Then the examiner just says, stop. That'll do. Move on. If you've done it well, good observations, good control, got parallel to the curb nicely, then you should pass. What I'm saying here is that if your examiner asks you, are you finished? Don't tell them you have until you are sure you have. Don't give up on your manoeuvre until you are happy with it. And that leads me on to my final bit of advice in this video. Don't give up. Even if you think you've made a mistake, it may not be as bad as you think. It might not even be a mistake at all. It might be another myth. And if you do give up, then you are more likely going to fail. I can think of 2 examples where the examiner has intervened with the dual controls, yet my pupils have still passed. And they are just the examples I can remember. There's probably more. And how many times have you heard that if the examiner has to intervene, it's an automatic fail? The examples, well, one was for the angle start. My pupil was asked to pull over, stop within a car length of the car, and they were starting to get a bit closer than the car length of the car, so the examiner stopped them so that he didn't get too close and couldn't do the manoeuvre. Another example was at a mini roundabout. I was sitting in the back, quite busy, car looks like it's going straight, it's not signalling, we're turning left, they're going straight to go past us so we can go, they're not turning in front of us. And I'm thinking, yeah, it looks like we can go, we start moving, and then suddenly and unexpectedly the car turns into our path and the examiner slams on the brake and so don't I. And then the examiner goes, that car thought you were psychic, didn't they? There's no brake back there, Richard. Because of course I didn't hit the brake, I just hit the back of the seat from a normal reaction of going for the brake when I see something like that happen. The examiner still passed the pupil because the examiner does not expect a new driver to have the same levels of skill as themselves. That would be unreasonable. They do understand that people taking the learner test are new drivers, and as long as they got good enough levels of skill that they're not causing a hazard, they're safely driving and they're legal, then they should get a license. They don't expect them to be super expert, fast reactive drivers who are 10 years, 20 years experienced. They know the driver will get better with practice. So the examiner decided they still deserved the license. Well, that's all for this one. If you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for car insurance, check out the links to Collingwood and Confused in the description. If you're learning to drive and want to insure yourself on somebody else's car, then Collingwood are there for you because you can do so without affecting the owner's policy. And that takes away a big stress from the owner of that car. Via the link at the moment, there's up to 35% off and a £20 Amazon gift card. If you want to insure your own car, I recommend checking out the link to confused.com because you fill out one quote form and get loads of quotes back from many insurers to compare who's cheapest. And you can change your car on that quote as many times as you like without having to do the whole quote again. So if you're shopping around for different cars, you want to know how much it costs to insure those different cars, just do one quote form and change the car on that quote and you'll get a new price for each car. Using links doesn't cost you anything, but it does support the channel, so thank you very much. Subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.